Hello and thank you for watching. In this video, I'm going to talk about the important figure of Gedaliah. Who was Gedaliah? Why was he killed? And what happens afterwards? Before I start, I want to mention that some of my ideas are inspired by the lectures of archaeologist Oded Lifshitz of Tel Aviv University. But I'm really not going to talk about archaeology. I'm just going to focus on the words of Tanakh, including some inferences, some things that aren't explicitly mentioned, but if you read closely, you can infer that they happened. But first, let's meet the family. Here we have Gedaliah's family tree. He comes from an important, educated family of scribes in Jerusalem. And as we'll soon see, they even have the courage, when necessary, to come into confrontation with the kings, the royal family. At first, in the days of King Yoshiyahu, he gets along very well with the scribes. His head scribe's name is Shaphan, and together with Shaphan and his son Ahikam, along with the high priest and the prophetess at the time, they lead a sort of religious awakening in the country. And this religious awakening in turn brings also success and prosperity to the country. But the King Yoshiyahu gets a little carried away in this euphoria and makes a grave error when he gets involved in international affairs. The two superpowers at the time are Egypt and Babylon, and he intercedes in a war between them, and as a result, he's killed in battle by the Pharaoh of Egypt. Now, it is around this time that we have a new prophet on the scene, Yirmiyahu, and he's going to preach, of course, repentance and the people need to follow the Torah, but he also has a message for the kings of Judah that they need to submit to whoever the superpower is controlling the land of Israel at the time, not to get involved in wars and coalitions and rebellions. And this quote here, which was written by rabbis hundreds of years afterwards, I think it summarizes Yirmiyahu's political approach very well, that we need to be like a reed which is flexible and bends in the wind but is not uprooted by it, rather than stand tall like a tree with its branches and leaves, which can easily be uprooted by a strong wind. So that's the strategy, and that's what God tells him to preach. But of course, the kings don't really want to listen to that. And we have the king Yehoiakim. He rebels against the Babylonians, and he actually tries to get Yirmiyahu killed for the message he's preaching. But in the family of the scribes, they support Yirmiyahu, and they listen to him. And Ahikam saves Yirmiyahu's life from the hands of Yehoiakim. The next king, Yechoniah, he actually listens and submits to the Babylonians. So what they do is they send him to exile, along with many of the elite of the country. And Yirmiyahu sends them a message of support that God says he has not forgotten them and they will eventually return to the land of Israel. And he sends that message in the hands of another scribe from the family of Shaphan. His name is El-Asa. So you see here, there's already a friendship blossoming between the prophet and this family of scribes. And that will continue in the days of King Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu, at the beginning of his reign, is obedient to the superpower, the Babylonians. He pays the heavy taxes. But at a certain point, he sees that they seem to be weakening and decides that this is the perfect time to rebel, which Yirmiyahu says is a mistake. And again, in the family of scribes, we have Gemariyahu and Michayahu, who carry Yirmiyahu's message to the king. They preach Yirmiyahu's message that the king must submit, but he doesn't listen even to them. And it's at this point that in the moderate camp, they realize that there is no hope. Like Yirmiyahu says, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed if they don't stop the rebellion, and the king is not listening. So they decide that they're going to prepare for the day after. They know Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, but they want to be able to just continue to live in peace in the country, according to the Torah. And so what they do is they quietly slip out of Jerusalem and begin to congregate in the region known as the land of Benjamin, just north of Jerusalem. And we can infer, based on later events, that Gedaliah was there as well, and he was already a leader of this moderate camp at the time, even before Jerusalem was destroyed. And part of how we know this is because it says in the book of Yirmiyahu that Yirmiyahu tries to escape Jerusalem. And he's going to join the moderates because they're the ones that listen to him. But he's caught at the north gate of the city by the king's guards, and they throw him into jail, where he will remain until Jerusalem is destroyed. And it's as if God is pulling the strings behind the scenes, sending Yirmiyahu the message that he can't be absolved of his responsibility. He has a mission. He needs to continue to preach and try to save Jerusalem until the very end. And the truth is, Yirmiyahu comes very close to succeeding, because in the last face-to-face meeting between the king Tzidkiyahu and prophet Yirmiyahu, the king, he admits that he knows Yirmiyahu is right and he speaks God's truth, that the rebellion will not succeed. But nonetheless, he says, I cannot surrender to the Babylonians because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that they're going to hand me over to the moderate camp who is already preparing to surrender. And at this moderate camp, they're going to take revenge on me. And Yirmiyahu, of course, tells them that's not going to happen. And Yirmiyahu knows them well. But Tzidkiyahu doesn't listen, and we know how that ends. Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, and Tzidkiyahu gets sent to exile in Babylon, along with the wealthy class of society and the people of Jerusalem who were involved in the rebellion. But the Babylonians have no interest in emptying the land of Israel. For them, they want to do as little as possible to ensure no rebellions, but keep a population there that can continue to work the land, the economy to continue so that they can pay the taxes. For the Babylonians, it's all about the Benjamins. And therefore, they appoint Gedaliah to be the governor of all the people that remain. And Gedaliah sees this as an opportunity for a second chance. This is what he prepared for. And he therefore sends a message to the poor people who are remaining in the land, and also to the refugees who had escaped and were now in the surrounding countries, to come back, work the land, obey the Babylonians, pay the heavy taxes, but at least they can continue to live in peace, according to the Torah, in their country. But this second chance is quickly shot down because among the refugees that survived the destruction is a man by the name of Yishmael ben Netanyah. And he's a distant relative of the royal family. And he apparently still bears a grudge against Gedaliah. So Gedaliah invites him to come to a meal in his new capital of Mitzpah, but Ishmael tricks him, brutally murders him and members of his inner circle. And now the Jews remaining in Israel are thrown into turmoil. They are afraid that the Babylonians are going to punish them, and they do not know what to do. So the person who steps up and becomes the de facto leader at this point is a man by the name of Yohanan ben Kareah. And he's actually the guy that warned Gedaliah that he can't trust Ishmael, but Gedaliah didn't listen. And Yohanan ben Kareah leads an exodus of the Jews out of Israel, ironically, to Egypt, because Egypt is not yet under the control of the Babylonians, and they think that they'll be safe there. And they even ask Yirmiyahu what they should do, because Yirmiyahu was among them. They ask him for the word of God, and he says, God says you need to stay in the land of Israel. Only there will you be safe. Only there will you be protected. But they don't listen. They say, it's lies. God didn't send you with that message. And they go to Egypt. And Yirmiyahu says, because you did not listen, the sword of the Babylonians that you feared, it will come and punish you here in Egypt. But he says, you will return to the land of Israel, but just very few in number, just the survivors as refugees. And that's actually the last we hear of Yirmiyahu. But just like as all those other prophecies came true, we must assume that this happened as well. And that just 8 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, the Babylonians, they subdue Egypt as well. And we must assume that many Jews were killed in that conquest, in that campaign, but that some refugees managed to return back to the land of Israel, just like Yirmiyahu said they would. And when they come back, they have no leadership. And they come back to find that some non-Jews from the surrounding areas began to settle in the former territory of Judah. And they start to mingle with them, to intermarry even with these non-Jews. And that's how they lead their lives for the next 1, 2, or 3 generations, until the day when the new king Cyrus the Great of Persia makes a decree that Jews from Babylon can go back. They can leave the exile, and some of them do go back to the land of Israel. And that's discussed in the book of Ezra. which does not mention that there were actually Jews already living there. But I believe that it can be inferred from the fact that these Jews coming back from Babylon, they constantly refer themselves as Bnei Hagolah, or Kahal Hagolah, the community of the exile, as if to differentiate themselves from other Jews that were there all along. But they don't really consider them Jewish, which of course is a point of great tension between these two groups. And therefore, it's no wonder that when they rebuild the temple, some of the surrounding peoples offer to help. They want to be part of the project because really they're partly Jewish. But the community of the exile, the Jews that came back from Babylon, say, no, you're not part of this, because they don't really consider them Jewish. And it's no wonder that later on there's a problem of intermarriage. And this is amongst the Jews now that came back from Babylon, because the behavior of the Jews that were there all along is rubbing off on them. They see that they were intermarrying for years. And they have a leader, though, the community of the exile. They have Ezra, the scribe, who wages a war against this intermarriage. And it's no wonder that later on, throughout the Second Temple period, we have different sects, different groups trying to convince the public that their version of the Jewish religion is the authentic one. And this sad state of affairs, I think, has its roots in the tragedy of Gedaliah. Gedaliah had a chance to create a new beginning, to keep the continuity of Jews living according to the Torah in the land of Israel, but it was quickly destroyed in God's judgment. But there is a silver lining to the story, because if we fast forward a few hundred years, it's deja vu, when now the Romans are laying siege to Jerusalem. And just like in the day of the Babylonians in the First Temple, there are different groups. There are zealots who want to fight and want to rebel, but there are also moderates. And a leader of these moderates is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. But he was trapped in Jerusalem, much like Yirmiyahu. And like Yirmiyahu, he tries to escape, but this time he succeeds. And it's quite miraculous how he gets out. He has to feign his own death, and he is smuggled out in a coffin by his students. But God has mercy and lets him out, and he's able to join the other Hachamim in Yabne, where they establish an academy, a yeshiva, and are able to pick up the pieces and have even just a small continuity of Jews living in the land of Israel according to the Torah. And that's something that didn't happen after the First Temple was destroyed. And there are 4 fast days that commemorate tragedies that happened with the First Temple. We have the siege of Jerusalem, the walls being breached, the temple being destroyed, and the tragedy of Gedaliah. And they're all repeated except for that last one, the Second Temple. And it almost happened again because we had Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai in this precarious position, but God had mercy. He let his continuation in Yabne be successful. And that's something that we should think about and appreciate on this fast day of Gedaliah, that we're only mourning a tragedy that happened once, not twice. And another thing I think we can be appreciative on the fast of Gedaliah, fast forwarding to the present day, when we have the state of Israel, we don't need to give up on anything. We don't have to submit to any foreign powers. We are independent in our own country and still are able to live according to the Torah. And that's something I think we should appreciate and take advantage of. So I hope you have an easy and meaningful fast.